He hacked my files at 2:17 a.m. Today, the whole office will watch what he really did. My name is Vanessa. I'm 29 years old, and this is how I turned their betrayal into my blueprint for power. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. It started on a Wednesday, the kind of cold, fluorescent-lit morning that always made the office feel like a waiting room for bad news. The air conditioning was cranked too high again. The kind of artificial chill that slipped beneath your clothes and stayed there, prickling across your skin. My knuckles had gone stiff, and every breath felt a little too sharp, like winter had been pumped through the vents overnight. I cupped the flimsy paper coffee cup between my palms, letting the weak warmth soak into my fingers, pretending it helped more than it did. And while I stared into that watery swirl of cheap roast, I could feel him looking at me. Tyler, the kind of coworker who never said anything outright. He didn't need to. He preferred quiet sabotage, gentle nudges meant to bruise, carefully placed comments designed to look innocent, landmines disguised as jokes, and he always wore the same expression, that faint, harmless smile that made people think he was friendly, harmless, approachable, but I knew better. I always had. He hovered behind my progress like a shadow that didn't belong to me, waiting for the right moment to dim whatever I tried to shine. We were gathered in the fourth-floor conference room, same place as always, same stiff chairs, same faint chemical smell from the carpet cleaner, same bowl of stale mints in the center of the table. The projector on the ceiling hummed its low electric drone, casting a blank blue light across the wall like an empty stage waiting for its performer. The cinnamon rolls someone had dropped off in the break room still scented the hallway, mixing with the bitter aroma of burnt coffee and perfume. People shuffled in, settling into their routine, tapping on keyboards, scrolling through emails, half listening, half wishing the meeting would end before it started. And then, like a soft breath drawn by the room itself, the lights dimmed just a little. Not enough for drama, just enough for attention. The screen flickered behind me. I didn't turn around. Not yet. The timing was too perfect, too familiar. Instead, I pretended to keep reading my notes, though I wasn't seeing a single word. I could feel the shift in the air before I heard it. A gasp, small, quick. Then another. Then that ripple of laughter, the kind people try to swallow but can't because the surprise cracks through too fast. Then the hush that follows when curiosity turns into something else. Something sharper, something quiet. I lifted my chin, slow, controlled, like every movement was deliberate, and there it was. My browser history, plastered across the wall in glowing, humiliating clarity, a parade of private-looking searches marching in oversized, unforgiving letters. The kind of things people weren't supposed to see. The kind of things that made strangers tilt their heads in judgment. One search asked how to confess feelings after embarrassing yourself. Another wondered whether HR could tell if you cried in a bathroom. Others looked sad or messy or deeply personal in a way that made people uncomfortable. The tabs scrolled automatically like a silent movie someone had accidentally turned on. The room didn't know whether to laugh or avert their eyes. So they whispered, leaned closer, pretended to work while not working at all. And Tyler. He sat 2 chairs away like he had been waiting for this moment to bloom. His cold brew sat beside him, condensation dripping down the plastic cup. His arm rested on the back of his chair, posture loose, confident, smug. He didn't smirk fully. He never committed that openly. But the corner of his mouth lifted just enough to leave fingerprints all over the crime. Heat rushed through my face. Not the sting of embarrassment, but the simmer of something steadier, the pressure just beneath the skin, the kind that sharpens focus instead of breaking it. I didn't move, didn't close the laptop, didn't hide. I simply breathed in, breathed out, and let the room stare, because every tab on that screen was planted by me. I had created that browser profile 2 weeks earlier. It started with little things. A tab rearranged, a file moved, a cursor position different from where I'd left it. Then a login ping at 2:17 a.m. from a device I didn't recognize. And then the final straw, my annual report draft relocated to a completely different shared drive without my permission. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I clicked the wrong folder. Maybe I left a window open. Maybe I was tired, but the pattern repeated, and repeated, and repeated again, until the coincidences stacked too neatly, until the picture became too clear to ignore. So I set the trap, and I made it irresistible. I spent a full night crafting that fake profile. Weak searches, vulnerable diary entries, bookmarks that hinted at stress, insecurity, distraction. The kind of digital crumbs someone like him would find impossible not to follow. Then I left it open on my laptop, not obviously, just convincingly enough. And he took the bait. But the final tab wasn't a joke. It was a door, a folder on a private drive. Inside, a document labeled Unauthorized Access Evidence. As the last of the searches scrolled across the wall, confusion began overtaking amusement. People leaned forward, squinting, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The room fell into that uneasy quiet that happens when an audience realizes the plot isn't what they thought. And just as the cursor hovered over the file name, a knock cut through the tension. The door opened, slow, intentional. 2 HR reps stepped inside. Mr. Carson led, holding a stapled packet thick enough to matter. His expression was neutral, unreadable, the kind of calm that only comes when someone already knows exactly what happens next. He didn't greet anyone, didn't explain himself. He walked straight to the projector, eyes steady. "Pause it," he said. His voice was even, controlled, a tone that made the room hold its breath. I watched Tyler from the corner of my eye. His posture shifted, barely, but enough. His elbow slipped off the back of the chair. The cold brew didn't return to his lips. Mr. Carson clicked through the final tabs, scanning the screen with quiet precision. Then he turned toward me, his gaze steady. "Ms. Garrett, is this your browser?" I nodded once. My voice stayed level. "The folder at the end contains system logs." He understood immediately, and the single nod he gave back wasn't to me. It was to the truth. He faced the room. "Everyone, please remain seated." He opened the folder. Then, the document. And the screen lit up with the truth I'd been collecting. IP logs, timestamps, session screenshots, one after another. Tyler's credentials appearing again and again like a signature he didn't realize he'd left behind. The room didn't whisper now. They barely breathed. The final image displayed the timestamp, 2:17 a.m., his ID, his session. Accessing a folder marked Q4 Board Proposal, Private. Tyler's voice cracked. "This is out of context!" Mr. Carson lifted a hand without looking at him. "You'll have the opportunity to explain, but not here." The second HR rep stepped forward. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her presence said everything. Tyler stood, scraping his chair loudly against the floor, searching for support that didn't come. His gaze darted around the room, desperate for someone to save him. No one moved. No one dared. Betrayal has a way of isolating the betrayer long before the consequences land. He walked past me, stopped, hesitated. Maybe he wanted to plead, maybe he wanted to glare, but I didn't look at him. I reached calmly for my coffee, took a small sip, and said, "Shall we continue?" The projector went dark a second later. Clean. Final. He shared my browser history, so I let him share his guilt. The hallway outside the conference room was still buzzing when the door closed behind him. The sound didn't fade all at once. It thinned slowly, like someone pulling tension apart, thread by thread. Voices slipped through the thin drywall, muffled but sharp enough to catch the words they thought were being whispered quietly. People in this office pretended they hated drama, pretended they rolled their eyes at gossip, pretended they were far too busy and sophisticated to engage in workplace rumors. But the truth was simpler. They lived off it. It fueled them as much as the mediocre coffee in the break room. And now the hive had found fresh nectar. The fluorescent lights above me hummed in that ever-present way, vibrating just enough to feel like a headache settling behind my eyes. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning spray left behind by the early morning janitorial crew, mingling with the lingering sweetness of the cinnamon rolls we all knew tasted better in scent than in flavor. I stood still for a moment, letting the noise fade, letting the air settle around me. Then the door clicked fully shut, swallowing the last trace of Tyler's footsteps as HR led him away. Inside the conference room, people shifted in their chairs. The atmosphere was different now, charged, uncertain, cautious. Their eyes landed on me with something I rarely saw directed my way. Not pity, not amusement, not even curiosity. Something closer to respect. And beneath that respect, the tiniest edge of fear. They knew what they had witnessed wasn't luck. It was strategy. And strategy unsettles people who rely on blending into the background. I didn't blame them. They had just watched a trap close around someone who thought he was untouchable. When the meeting finally ended, chairs scraped softly, papers rustled, and people filed out in pairs or small clusters, speaking quietly, avoiding looking at me for too long. I slipped out before anyone could corner me with those rehearsed lines meant to sound supportive but built entirely to keep themselves safe. The hallway's light felt too bright after the dim conference room. Everything smelled sharper, cleaner somehow, as if the confrontation had bleached the air itself. A few coworkers tried to offer quick versions of concern. "Are you okay?" That was crazy. "Wow, what a morning." Their voices didn't linger long enough to hear anything I might have said, not that I planned on saying much. They weren't looking for an answer. They were looking for reassurance that whatever storm had just hit the office wasn't about to sweep them into its center. I walked straight to my desk. My monitor slept in a soft blue glow like nothing had changed. Like the last hour hadn't cracked something open in the building. But the energy felt different, like a ripple still vibrating under the surface of everything. I dropped my bag gently onto the floor, took a steadying breath, and tapped the spacebar. The screen brightened. 12 unread messages, all from people who never reached out to me directly. People who usually asked me for files, for numbers, for updates, never for well-being. And suddenly they cared, or pretended to. Jenna's message arrived first. "Are you all right?" That was wild. I could almost hear her voice saying it. Light, airy, tinged with fascination rather than sympathy. I scrolled down. Mark had emailed too. "Hey, didn't know what was happening in there. Hope you're good." A lie wrapped in casual friendliness. Of course he knew what was happening. They all did. They just didn't want to admit how intently they were watching. Then I saw Tyler's email, sent 13 minutes before the meeting. Morning. Heads up might show something funny during briefing. No hard feelings. My jaw didn't tighten. My heart didn't sink. I didn't feel that sudden rush of heat that embarrassment brings. Instead, I stared at the message with a quietness I didn't expect from myself. I closed the email without replying. He had really believed it, that he was moments away from humiliating me, that he was clever enough to pull it off, that he was powerful enough to walk away unscathed. But the worst part wasn't that he thought he could win. It was that he assumed I wouldn't fight back. Not because he thought I was incapable, but because he thought I was too quiet, too calm, too unnoticeable to ever strike first. People underestimate quiet women. They assume silence is submission. They forget silence is sometimes a weapon sharpened on patience. My phone buzzed against the desk. A text from my older sister in Michigan. "Saw your LinkedIn update. Big meeting today? You'll crush it." The timing almost made me laugh. She had no idea what had unraveled here. She didn't know about Tyler, or the decoy profile, or the evidence folder. But her message grounded me in something normal. Something outside the fluorescent lights and stale pastries and thin walls of the corporate world. I typed back, "Thanks. It's been eventful." She called instantly. I watched her name flash across my screen. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to talk to her, but because saying the words out loud would make them too real, too heavy. I needed space in my mind first. By noon, HR emailed everyone in the department, a directive to stop by the fourth-floor office for individual clarifications about the incident. Professional language for damage control, for cleanup, for making sure Tyler's mess stayed contained. I tried focusing on work, actual tasks, real responsibilities, updating reports, answering questions, running numbers. But my mind kept circling back to the small moments I had ignored, moments that stood out now as neon signs pointing toward everything he had been doing. 3 weeks ago, my desk drawer slightly open when I arrived. 2 weeks ago, my inbox flooded with password reset requests I never prompted. Last week, my USB drive disappearing, only to return beneath a sticky cinnamon roll box in the break room. Each moment harmless in isolation, each moment easy to explain away. But patterns don't need permission to form. They build themselves out of the things we don't want to notice. By 1 o'clock, my name appeared in my inbox. Please proceed to HR. The walk down the hallway felt long, but my steps stayed steady. The carpet puffed gently beneath my shoes, absorbing the small aftershocks of adrenaline still humming through me. Not fear, not dread, just the echo of standing my ground. Mr. Carson sat behind his desk, glasses slid low on his nose, flipping through a folder thick with printed logs and screenshots. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Take a seat, Vanessa." I sat, folding my hands lightly in my lap. He studied me a moment, long enough to communicate that he understood the weight of what had unfolded. "We found extensive unauthorized access," he said. "Your precautions were impressive." That word, impressive, landed differently. No sarcasm, no dismissal. A rare and genuine acknowledgement. I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." He tapped one finger on the folder. "I need to ask how you discovered the breach." So I told him. Every detail. The mouse movements. The relocated draft. The 2:17 a.m. login. The building of the decoy profile. The evidence folder. He didn't interrupt. He didn't question my memory. He simply listened, taking in each piece like puzzle parts fitting together. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You understand this could escalate." "I do," I said. "Do you feel unsafe at work?" "No," I answered. "Not anymore." He closed the folder. "Tyler will be placed under formal investigation, effective immediately." The words didn't bring triumph. They didn't spark gloating. They simply settled into place, like a puzzle piece finding its home. He deserved this, not because he had targeted me, but because he thought he was entitled to do it. When I stepped out of the HR office, the air felt clearer. The building's tall windows let in muted afternoon light, painting the hallway in soft gold reflections off the downtown skyline. Traffic hummed faintly from below, a reminder that the world moved on whether or not someone's morning unraveled. On the way back to my desk, Jenna intercepted me, her eyes wide, her voice gentle as she touched my arm. "Are you okay? Really okay?" I managed a small smile. "I'm fine." She looked like she wanted to say more, then leaned closer and whispered, "He shouldn't have done that. Everyone saw what he did." Everyone did. That was the entire purpose. By 5 o'clock, the office emptied like someone had opened a drain. People avoided lingering too close to me, not out of discomfort, but because they didn't want to step into the gravity of a situation that no longer involved them. Witnesses rarely want to be part of the fallout. I packed slowly. Notebook, pen, charger, coat. Each item felt like a tether being carefully undone. The air outside the building was crisp, carrying the scent of an oncoming rainstorm. The sky was streaked pink and lavender above the parking lot. I stood for a moment, letting the cold breeze cool the last remnants of tension from my skin. My phone buzzed again, Emily calling. This time I lifted the phone to my ear. She asked softly, "Hey, you okay?" I closed my eyes, letting the breeze wash over me. "I will be," I said. She didn't ask for details. Sisters know when questions aren't needed. I got into my car, started the engine, and stayed parked for several seconds, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The office building stood behind me, tall and glassy, reflecting the dying sunlight. As I backed out of the parking spot, I watched the building shrink in the rearview mirror. It felt like leaving the first chapter of a book I hadn't realized I was writing. But the story wasn't finished, because what he tried to give me wasn't humiliation. He gave me evidence, documentation, proof of a pattern he thought he could hide. And now I had something he didn't: leverage. And I wasn't done using it. I didn't sleep much that night. The hours drifted by in quiet, uneven stretches, the kind where shadows seem to move across the walls even though nothing shifts at all. Not because I was anxious, not because the day had rattled me, but because the silence finally gave me space to think. Space I hadn't had in months. It was like my mind had finally uncluttered itself after being crowded with noise, pressure, and suspicion for too long. All the pieces that had scattered over the last few months were rearranging themselves now, fitting together cleanly, forming a picture I should have recognized sooner, patterns I had ignored, red flags I had excused, choices I had given the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The house was dim and still, the air cool from the night's lingering chill. Outside my window, the sky over Nashville was still dark, that soft, muted blue just before sunrise, when the world feels both heavy and hopeful at the same time. A quiet kind of in-between. I pushed myself out of bed, feeling a strange steadiness settle into my bones. Not calm exactly, just clarity. I walked into the kitchen, flipped on the coffee maker, and leaned against the counter as it sputtered, steamed, and finally filled the mug. I wrapped my fingers around the warmth and watched the thin ribbon of steam drift upward, slow enough to make the whole room feel still. As I sipped, I kept thinking about the moment his smirk disappeared in that conference room. The exact second when the reality of what he had done blindsided him, when the casual arrogance drained out of his face and fear replaced it. That look, shock melting into disbelief, disbelief melting into panic, was something I knew would replay in my head long after this ordeal ended. By the time I drove into the office parking lot, the sun had risen enough to paint the tops of the scattered clouds in pale gold, but the air felt colder. Too still, too watchful. Companies hold their breath during scandal. It's a strange phenomenon. It's like the walls themselves tighten, afraid they're going to be caught absorbing guilt by accident. Inside, the morning buzz was quieter than usual. People moved slower, typed softer. Even the coffee machines hissed quietly, like they were whispering instead of steaming. Every conversation seemed to stop the moment I passed by. The kind of sudden silence that isn't subtle. I wasn't surprised. News spreads fast here, and what happened yesterday wasn't the kind of thing people forget. My desk had a new envelope sitting neatly on the keyboard. My name was written in clean black ink, no smudge, no crease, carefully placed, deliberate. Inside was a short note from HR, only one sentence. Please stop by at 9 a.m., Mr. Carson. No explanation, no details, just a summons. I sat down, woke up my laptop, and tried distracting myself with emails, but the cursor blinked back at me, unblinking, as if daring me to pretend I could ignore what was coming. My mind kept drifting back through the timeline I had tried not to trace before. Little signs, little shifts, little shadows that made sense now only because the lights had been turned on. 7 months ago, when I first joined the team, Tyler made it known he had been there longer than me. He talked like he owned the place, leaned back in his chair with his hands behind his head, telling anyone who would listen about how upper management praised his dedication. But the funny thing was that he never talked about actual work. He talked about perception, about being seen, about staying ahead, about knowing how to angle himself so he always looked indispensable, even if he wasn't. I didn't pay attention then, but I do now. At 8:58, I stood, smoothed my blouse, and walked down the hallway toward HR. The carpet softened my footsteps, absorbing the faint tremor in my chest. Not fear, just the lingering pulse of adrenaline, like the echo of a storm after the thunder has stopped. When I reached the office, the door was already open. Mr. Carson glanced up and gestured for me to enter. His expression was calm, professional, serious in a way that tightened something deep inside my ribs. He waited until I sat before he closed the folder in front of him. "Vanessa, we've completed the initial phase of the investigation," he said. I nodded slowly, keeping my hands still even though they felt warm. "And?" He folded his hands on the desk, his fingers intertwining in deliberate calm. "We found extensive evidence of unauthorized access to your accounts. Your documentation helped us identify the breach quickly." I stayed quiet, letting him speak, letting the weight of his words settle. He glanced down at the folder again. "We also discovered something else, something you didn't include." My heartbeat didn't speed up, but it felt like someone had dimmed the room slightly, just enough to sharpen every sense. "What do you mean?" I asked. He slid a printed page toward me across the desk, a system log. I recognized the layout immediately, but the name at the top wasn't mine. It was his. Tyler had accessed several folders belonging to other employees, personal evaluations, draft presentations, private messages, even HR files, and not just once, repeatedly, consistently, a pattern that had been invisible only because no one else had noticed something was missing. My breath caught in my throat. "He wasn't just targeting me?" "No," Carson said. "It appears you were the only one who noticed the discrepancies." The weight of that landed deep in my chest, heavy, cold. I had been so focused on protecting myself that I hadn't seen how far his reach really extended. Carson continued, "We'll be issuing a formal statement to the department soon. Before we do, we need your perspective." He paused. "Did you ever feel threatened?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer lived between lines that were difficult to articulate. "Yes," I finally said, "but not physically." He tried to undermine me, subtly at first. And he was getting bolder. Carson nodded slowly, absorbing my words like they were part of a larger puzzle. "We believe he may have viewed you as a threat to his advancement." I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound obvious. When the meeting ended, I stepped into the hallway and leaned briefly against the cool wall, just long enough to let the reality settle into place. This wasn't just office drama. This wasn't petty competition. This was a pattern of sabotage, of manipulation wearing a pretend smile, of entitlement disguised as ambition. When I returned to my desk, the emails had multiplied. People asking if I had a moment, people offering support, people pretending they hadn't laughed the day before. The hypocrisy wasn't surprising, but it was exhausting. Jenna approached again, quieter this time. She perched on the edge of my desk, her voice low. "Hey," she said. "HR talked to me too." My pulse quickened. "What did they ask?" "Everything," she whispered. "When he started acting weird, when he questioned your reports, when he took credit for your slides last month." I blinked slowly. The words hit me like a weight dropped onto a table. "He took credit for my slides?" I asked. Jenna winced. "Oh, you didn't know?" A slow, controlled anger warmed at the center of my chest. Not the kind that flares and burns out. The kind that glows steadily. Focused. A warning light. "No," I said quietly. Jenna reached out and touched my arm. "HR knows now. They're taking it seriously." I nodded, because nodding was all I could trust myself to do. The rest of the day unfolded like scenes moving through syrup. Slow, deliberate, impossible to rush. People whispered in corners. Tyler's empty chair felt like a ghost sitting among us. Management walked through the office avoiding eye contact, as if they were afraid of being asked to pick a side. Something had shifted, and not just for me. The entire floor felt tilted. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Not everything is what it looks like." I stared at the message, feeling a cold thread weave down my spine. Another text came seconds. "Later. Please. I'm begging you." I didn't need to hear the voice to know whose it was. Tyler. Somehow still trying to control the narrative, still trying to twist the truth into something he could use, still trying to steer the story in his direction even as it slipped through his hands. I locked my phone and stood, walking to the nearest window overlooking the city. The sky outside had begun to darken again, clouds rolling over Tennessee like a warning that something was coming. "Not everything is what it looks like," the words repeated in my head. And then the realization hit me. sharp and immediate. He wasn't texting out of guilt. He wasn't texting for mercy. He was texting because he knew something else was coming next. Something big. Something he was afraid I would expose. And he was right to be afraid. Because the game wasn't over. Not even close. This was just the middle. The part where pressure builds, where cracks form, where secrets start breaking loose. And he had no idea. I wasn't done yet. By Friday, the office had changed. Not officially. Not in policy memos or scheduled meetings or the color-coded calendar events posted on the break room wall. But something quieter had shifted. Something beneath the surface. Something in the way people moved. It wasn't visible at first glance. It was in the small things. The way a door clicked shut a little quicker. The way voices fell to whispers even when no one was close enough to overhear. The way chairs creaked softer because people sat down more gently as if the air had grown fragile. Every conversation felt dipped in caution, like everyone was suddenly afraid their words might be caught drifting through a wall or bouncing off a cubicle divider. And in a way, Tyler had become a ghost, a presence you couldn't see anymore but still felt in the room, lingering in the tension, in the silence, in the sideways glances exchanged between coworkers who were still trying to figure out what the new rules were now that he wasn't part of the daily orbit. His desk was cleared that morning. No slow transition, no box of belongings left to be picked up later. Just gone. Empty. Wiped clean. His monitor had vanished, cables coiled neatly as if someone had intentionally erased the trace of who once sat there. His chair was pushed in so precisely it looked staged. The only thing left behind was a faint coffee ring on the desk, a pale ghost of his cold brews, proof that he had existed in this space even if the company was already trying to pretend he hadn't. HR hadn't announced whether he was fired. They only said he was under review, a phrase that sounded sanitized and sterile. But everyone knew. No one comes back from what he did. Not here. Not after what the department witnessed. Not after the investigation logs circulated between the people who needed to see them. Still, the messages kept coming. At first, they arrived from an unknown number. Short sentences, pleading words. Then he must have realized I wasn't responding, because the number changed. A blocked one this time. Then a different one. Then another. Then I found messages in my spam folder from a burner email address with a name so generic it almost made me laugh. All with the same tone. All the same desperate thread running beneath the words. He kept telling me I misunderstood, that he didn't mean it, that it was just a joke, that he never intended for anything to get this far, that I was overreacting, that I needed to hear his side, that he deserved a chance to explain. The gaslighting was familiar, his patterns were familiar, but this time they didn't land. They hit the surface and fell flat. This time I had receipts, evidence, logs, screenshots, camera footage. This time, every attempt he made to twist the narrative only tightened the rope around his own story. That afternoon, I went to HR one final time. Not because they asked, because I needed to hand them something I had prepared long before I even knew what the ending of this story would be. A flash drive. Small. Silver. Cold to the touch. Encrypted. Password protected. Inside, it was everything I had collected, every log, every screenshot. The fabricated browser history metadata that proved the decoy profile. Even the security camera clip from the night he logged in, the clip I had no right to have and no guilt about obtaining. They asked how I got that one. I said, I asked the janitor. He didn't think it was a big deal. That was true. He didn't. To him, it was just a quiet favor for someone who always said hello when most people walked by him without ever making eye contact. Mr. Carson looked at me differently after that. Not with suspicion, not with annoyance, but with understanding. Like he was finally beginning to see the fuller picture of who he had been dealing with. Not a victim, not a scared employee, not someone who stumbled into a mess, someone who anticipated it, someone who built a plan, someone who didn't back down when the ground shifted beneath her. After I handed the drive over, I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The hallway felt too still, too quiet. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors slid open to reveal Jenna standing inside. She held the door for me, didn't speak. Not until the doors closed and the elevator began to hum upward. Then she said softly, "You're really doing it, huh?" I met her eyes. "I'm just making sure no one else gets hurt." She nodded, but something in her expression changed. A flicker of something heavier. Guilt, maybe regret, something personal, something she had been carrying. "I should have said something sooner," she said. I tilted my head. "About what?" She looked up at the glowing floor numbers, avoiding my gaze as if the elevator walls might protect her from her own confession. 3 months ago, he asked for my login, said he needed to double-check something on the team drive. I gave it to him. I didn't think. Her voice trailed off, thinning into silence. I didn't push. I waited. Let her find the rest of her own truth. I didn't think he'd use it to, I don't know, get into your stuff. I nodded slowly. You couldn't have known. She swallowed hard. No, but I could have asked. We stood in silence until the elevator dinged. She stepped out first, then turned back before the doors closed. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "you didn't just save yourself." And then she was gone down the hallway, leaving me with her truth in my own. I drove home in silence that night. The sky was heavy with clouds, the thick, unmoving kind that don't rain. They just hover, like they're waiting for the right moment to release something. I passed the old high school on Elm Street, the one where I learned to disappear into my own quiet. I passed the diner my parents used to take us to for late-night pancakes after Sunday service. I passed the Walgreens where I got my first part-time job and learned how to read people by the way they placed things on the counter. All of those places felt smaller now, not because the town had changed, but because I wasn't the same woman who used to pass them. At home, the kitchen was dim. I lit a candle on the counter. Cinnamon. The same scent from the break room the morning he tried to destroy me. The flame flickered gently, casting amber shadows across the cabinets. I sat at the table with my old journal, the one I hadn't opened since college, and flipped to a blank page, and I wrote one sentence. He underestimated the quiet girl. I didn't write anything else. I didn't need to. Sometimes clarity fits in a single line. The next morning, I received the official notice from HR. A clean, precise email with a corporate tone so polished it almost felt detached. Tyler's employment had been terminated, effective immediately. His access revoked, his name removed from internal documents. A formal apology issued to me and to the team. It should have felt final, like closure, but it didn't, because closure isn't something someone hands to you in a memo. It isn't a status update in the HR portal. It isn't a line in a company-wide announcement. Closure is internal. It's a decision, a line you draw yourself. So I took the weekend, didn't answer emails, didn't respond to the messages piling up on my phone. I sat on the porch in an old hoodie, drinking tea, letting the breeze scrape gently across my face, watching leaves swirl over the front lawn in slow, spiraling patterns. November in Tennessee is unpredictable. Sunlight one day, frost the next, and a strange in-between in the days that don't decide what they want to be. But that Saturday was golden. Not warm, not cold, just still. A kind of stillness that presses its palm against your shoulder and tells you to breathe. And in that stillness, I decided something. It wasn't enough to destroy what he did. I needed to build what he tried to block. I needed to push forward in the space he tried to shrink. A week later, I submitted my proposal for the regional director position, the same position he had told anyone who would listen that I wasn't experienced enough for, the same role he tried to edge me out of by stealing my work and slipping my files from one drive to another. The VP called me personally, said she had reviewed my submission, said it was the most comprehensive presentation they'd received, and then she said something that made my chest tighten with its quiet weight. "You came highly recommended by HR. Seems you have a knack for identifying risk." I didn't smile, I just answered, "I do." Because I did. I had spent months watching people look right through me, and that invisibility taught me more than any handbook or training module ever could. I saw who cut corners, who twisted narratives, who smiled politely while undermining others. I learned how to read the room without speaking, how to move without drawing attention, how to observe before acting. Tyler thought I was playing defense, but I wasn't. I was laying the foundation for something he couldn't touch. My promotion was approved 2 weeks later. New title, new office, same building, same floors, same hallways. But everything had changed, because when he tried to humiliate me, he exposed himself instead. When he tried to erase me, I rewrote the narrative. When they all looked at me like I was the victim, I reminded them of something simple and unshakable. Victims survive, but I rebuilt, and I won. The morning I moved into my new office, it rained. Not a harsh or stormy rain, not the kind that lashes sideways or rattles windows. It was soft, steady, a curtain of silver tapping gently against the wide glass panes of the building, the kind of rain that creates its own rhythm, a quiet reminder that nothing stays still forever, that everything shifts, dissolves, rebuilds. As I stepped through the lobby, the sound followed me, soft, persistent, almost meditative. I carried one box. That's all I allowed myself. Not because I didn't have more to bring, but because I didn't want to drag pieces of the old chapters with me. Inside were only essentials: my leather-bound notebook, edges worn from weeks of stress and long nights. A few framed memories, one with my sister from a summer at the lake, one from my college graduation, one from a day I once thought was ordinary but later realized mattered more than most. And at the very top, wrapped in a protective cloth, was a small stone paperweight my mother gave me when I landed my first job. A smooth river stone with carved letters that read, "Still waters run deep." Back then, I didn't understand what she meant, but now it felt prophetic. The building smelled faintly of fresh paint and new carpet, a scent that always reminded me of possibility. New hallways, new rooms, new chapters. My shoes made almost no sound against the newly installed flooring as I reached the elevator. The mirrored doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped in, hitting the button for the 6th floor. 6 floors up, not too high to feel distant from everything happening below, but high enough to see the city stretch far beyond the downtown skyline when the rain would eventually let up. High enough to stand above the noise, above the shifting currents of office politics, above the memory of everything that had led me here. When I unlocked the door to my new office, I paused on the threshold. The room wasn't large, but it felt spacious in its simplicity. Clean walls, tall windows, a sturdy desk with a new monitor, and a fresh notepad placed neatly at the center. The fluorescent lights had been replaced with warm-toned fixtures, so the room didn't feel cold like the spaces downstairs, and the rain danced down the glass like it belonged there. I set the box on the desk, unpacking slowly. I placed the stone paperweight on the corner, aligning it so the words faced me. Then I set the notebook beside it, smoothing the cover with my hand, as if grounding myself in the moment. When I finally exhaled, it wasn't relief. Relief was something you feel when something ends. This was something else. Arrival. A recognition of the space I had carved out for myself, inch by inch, strategic step by strategic step. Not long after, people began knocking, first softly, then more confidently as the morning went on. Some came with congratulations, smiling too broadly, trying too hard to seem supportive now that the dust had settled. Some came with questions, real questions, not small talk, because my new position meant they needed my input. And some came mainly out of curiosity, glancing around the office as if trying to catch some hint of the woman who took down Tyler. I smiled when appropriate. I was cordial, welcoming, professional, but I didn't perform, not anymore. I didn't shrink myself. I didn't soften my voice. I didn't apologize for taking up space. I simply existed as myself, without explanation or permission. By noon, I had my first official meeting, a regional strategy review. The kind of meeting that once made my stomach twist because I knew my work was being evaluated alongside people who had advantages I didn't. Now, I walked into that same fourth-floor conference room with a different posture, same hum of the overhead projector, same faint smell of over-sugared coffee mixing with the slightly metallic scent of nervous anticipation, same long table where I once sat at the far edge taking notes no one asked for. But this time, I wasn't at the edge. I was at the head of the table, the same seat he once joked I'd never grow into. The same seat he occupied while downplaying my work, while whispering to others that I wasn't ready. I let my fingers brush against the polished wood before sitting, grounding myself in the reality that the room hadn't changed at all, only my place in it had. People looked at me differently now, not just because of the title printed below my name, but because they saw what I did without any title, because they saw what happens when the quiet one decides she's done playing small. Power isn't in the role. It's in the choices you make before the role is ever offered. I opened the meeting, went over numbers and projections, asked questions, outlined proposals, and directed tactical shifts for Q1. I noticed the attention, the stillness when I spoke, the way pens hovered above notebooks waiting for the next point. And I didn't mention him, not once. Not his sabotage, not his downfall, not the way he spiraled in real time while the rest of the office watched. Because power doesn't gloat. It just moves. Later that week, Jenna stopped by with a folder of updated reports. She knocked gently, as she always did, and lingered a little too long in the doorway. Her expression was thoughtful, softer than usual, like she was holding on to a sentence she wasn't sure she should say aloud. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. I looked up from my monitor. "What part?" She stepped inside, closing the door halfway behind her. Her voice dipped lower, as if the room needed the privacy too. "About silence being a strategy." I nodded slowly. "And?" She exhaled, her shoulders dropping slightly. "I'm done being afraid of people like him. You reminded me. We don't owe anyone our quiet." Her words landed somewhere deep, not as flattery, as truth. As recognition of something that had been unspoken between so many women in this workplace. Her confession stayed with me long after she left, because real consequences don't stop at the person who's punished. They ripple outward. They shake loose the things cowardice buried. They force everyone else to reconsider the lines they've drawn and the ones they've tolerated. Over the next few weeks, changes swept through the company in waves. New security protocols, mandatory ethics training. Some sessions were quiet and uncomfortable. People avoided meeting each other's eyes. Private reviews were reopened. A few people left, some quietly, some abruptly. Others stepped up, stepping into integrity they had long ignored. And the culture, the whispered fear that always lived in the corners like dust, started to dissolve piece by piece. Every now and then, someone would stop me in the hallway. Sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with genuine sincerity. "I saw what you did." Or, "I wish I had done the same." Or simply, "Thank you." But I didn't do any of this for gratitude. I did it for the girl I used to be, the one who kept her head down because she didn't want to be called dramatic or difficult, the one who thought letting things slide was easier than confronting them, the one who believed staying quiet meant staying safe. She deserved better. So I built a workplace she would have thrived in. One Friday, I stayed late. The office emptied slowly. A few footsteps, a couple of hushed goodbyes, the soft thump of elevator doors. Then, silence. The lights dimmed to their motion sensor setting, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat at my desk until the hum of the building grew familiar, almost comforting. Then I opened my notebook. The same notebook that had been with me during every meeting, every strategy session, every quiet moment where I wondered if I was imagining the signs. I flipped to the page with the sentence I had written weeks earlier. "He underestimated the quiet girl." And beneath it, I wrote one final line, the line that felt like the last stitch in closing everything he tried to unravel. He shared my browser history, so I let him share his guilt. I closed the notebook, stood, and walked toward the window. Nashville's lights flickered in the distance, blurring slightly through the remnants of rain on the glass. I pressed my palm against the window, feeling the coolness sink gently into my skin, grounding me in the moment. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't vengeance. It was peace. The kind of peace that only arrives when you rebuild the fire that once tried to consume you. When you take everything someone tried to use against you and turn it into something unbreakable. I stood there in the quiet, letting the stillness wrap around me, and let one final thought settle in my mind. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.